Good evening. Welcome, everybody. Lovely to be with everyone tonight. I hope everyone is well during this time. It looks like it may go on for a while. I thought we could start just with checking in with our bodies and see if there's anything that we may be holding from the day or the weeks that we can just gently let go of for a short while. So one way we can get in touch with our bodies is just to check in with things that we take for granted often, just the simple sensations of the body, the breath, sense of being alive, present with the body. So as we do this, it's important to not be attempting to get somewhere by doing this, just to see what's here, just without trying to go anywhere else, without looking for it in any way outside of ourselves. And by outside of ourselves, I'm including memories, hopes, ambitions, old stories, how we define ourselves, any ideas that we may be holding about who we are that we're, in a sense, dragging into this moment. Just to be willing to set that aside. You know, they may have their own, limited reality in a certain way, but just for this short period of time, we can just see what is here when we're not trying to bring something into our present moment. So anything that arises, and any thought, any feeling, any sensation, we can sort of gently take note of it, but we can just be as passers-by, right? We don't have to engage. We can just notice, yes, that arose, that feeling, that thought, but we don't have to chase it. We don't have to run away from it. We don't have to be proud of it. We don't have to feel guilty about it. It's just a thought. So in a sense, we're just, whatever does arise, we'll allow it to be there. But we can take just a step back and be more in a position of noticing what's happening rather than being fully engaged in what's happening. So we're not judging ourselves in any way by the content of what might be arising. Whatever it is content. Content that's arising within our awareness, just like every other content. Some we might like more, some might be more exciting, some might be more challenging. Still, arisings within this awareness. So by this awareness, I'm including the mind and the body as objects within this awareness, simply because we can notice that thoughts are happening in the mind. We can notice that sensations and feelings are happening in the body. And yet what notices that is almost by definition, what notices that is prior to that is more fundamental than that. Without that awareness, whether thought existed or not, we would have no way of knowing. So that content, whether it appears on the outside of the skin or on the inside of the skin, in this sense that we're speaking of, doesn't really matter. It's still fodder for observation, you could say, right? We're just seeing what arises without giving too much credence to it either way. You know, if there's nothing arising and it's just quiet and peaceful, that's fine too. We don't have to sort of dig around and try to unearth things. So one of the things that we can notice is that the content of awareness, the content itself is always coming, always going, has a certain lifespan, doesn't stay forever. You know, whether it's an experience, a belief, you know, the state of our body, you know, the state of our feelings, you know, whether our mind is confused or not, or peaceful or not. All content. Nothing wrong with content, but it's important to recognize that there's something that isn't content. There's something that is of a different category altogether. In that this awareness is not something that can be observed. It's not something that we can stand back and look at. The only way we can, our mind may attempt to do that, right? But to do that, we're turning it into a concept that we can look at, grab hold of. But even while we're trying to do that, there's an awareness within which all of that happening, all of that drama, all of that efforting is happening. So for just a few minutes, we can take all of that content, however it's showing up for you right now, all of that content, and just sort of gently, you know, acknowledge its presence and just set it aside. Not in any kind of negative way or that we're trying to make something disappear or fix anything. It's just that we're trying to see what remains after all of that content is set aside. And what we have the opportunity to notice is that what remains is quiet. What remains is at peace already. We haven't attained anything, haven't fixed anything, resolved anything. And yet what notices the content is already at peace, present, non-judgmental. You might notice that there's no waiting. Any waiting is a mind-based activity. That awareness itself isn't waiting for something more profound to happen. That awareness isn't judging us. There's no shoulds or shouldn'ts that originate from that awareness. Mind, sure. Awareness, no. That awareness seems to exist independent of time. It's not changing over time. It is as, even though it feels like there's not much there that we can hang on to, just because any attempt to hang on to it is, of course, ego-based. But when we just relax into that, we can feel the solidity of it. Not solidity as in a solid object, but solidity in that it is always present, always fresh, always new, always, well, it's always what we are. You know, even when we're not trying to be that, it is unavoidably what we are. That's really the surprising thing about it. What we have been seeking our entire life, the real ground of being, the source of peace and happiness, is what we are. We seek what we have always been. It's actually the humor of it. When it's discovered that it's actually what we are, as is. No prerequisites. And the invitation is really to stay with that one simple recognition. Coming back to this space that we're examining right now. Just sensing into it, not trying to understand it, explain it, categorize it, give words to it, but just the direct experience of beingness, presence, awareness, consciousness, spirit. You know, doesn't matter what we call it. What's important is the actual direct recognition of it as what we are. Everything else occurs within that awareness. The entire world appears within that awareness of what you are. Not this, I'm not speaking sort of poetically or philosophically. I'm talking about the sheer reality of it. I mean, it can be seen even from a simple logic that that's true, that the entire world appears within this consciousness, within this awareness. No awareness, no world. No awareness, no body. All of those experiences, all of those sensations, all of those thoughts, all of those feelings, all of those memories, all of those hopes, all of those fears, all of it appears within this consciousness. Does it not? Is it not your direct experience that that is, in fact, how we experience life? It's sensed within this body mind. And what's aware of this body mind is this consciousness awareness. So at first, when we really understand that, even on a mental level, we can just come back to the sense of it in our own bodies, in our own awareness, often. Sometimes it takes some repetition for us to really trust that. Trust that that is faithful, always present, never judging. So it's helpful just to come back to that often during the day. It doesn't have to be at specified times. It can be walking down the hall, waiting for the water to boil. Lots of opportunities during the day to just come back to that simple recognition. Yes, here I am. There's aliveness here. There's beingness here. There's awareness here, regardless of the content. Good, bad, indifferent. Confused, at peace, all happening within awareness. Okay, everybody here? What I wanted to do tonight is to talk about this movement from a heart space, from awakening at the level of heart, to awakening at the level of Hara. I mean, we could call this, the lower chakras, we could call it our lower dantian, we could call it our gut, we could call it Hara. Okay, different terms, different traditions, but I sort of like head, heart, Hara. It has an alliteration to it, so we'll go with that. So last week we talked about waking up at the level of mind, of head, dropping down into awakening at the level of heart. So I wanted to just revisit that a little bit to put what we'll talk about tonight into context. So awakening at the level of head is really awakening from the tyranny of our thoughts and beliefs and ideas and opinions and concepts. Awakening from the level of mind, thinking mind. So this doesn't mean that thoughts never happen again. It's actually what the mind does, is thinks, right? One function of it. So we're not trying to undo what its function is. It can continue to think when it needs to. We'll put less energy into thinking when it doesn't really need to be thinking, just that repetitive, cyclical nature of thinking. And we can just see that there's nothing of any value there. Rational thought that we use at work, fine, there's no issue there. But it's just those repetitive thoughts where we're trying to relive the past, imagine the future, all the self-judgmental thoughts, judgments about other people, opinions, ideas, etc. Those kinds of thoughts lose their power. Lose their power not because we're trying to make them go away, just because we see that they're simply not true. They're simply not, they don't have any reality at the level of who we actually are. So what we wake up from is that we wake up from the dominance of this overthinking mind to a recognition that what we fundamentally are, essentially are, is beyond this body, beyond this mind, which is enormously liberating, right? We find out that we're not, no matter what the conditioned thought process is, you know, how painful it might be sometimes, how boring it might be sometimes, how limiting it might be, we find that that may all be true, but it's not actually who we are. It just takes all the juice out of it, right? We can still function, but we're not functioning out of that conditioning. We can begin to really see through it. And the recognition that what we are is of a fundamentally different dimension, not subject to birth, life, and death. You know, what we fundamentally are isn't a thing, a concept, an idea, but it is actually free of that. So awareness is not subject to our thoughts about ourselves, our thoughts about other people's thoughts about us. All of that's not relevant. To our mind, sure, to our self-image, sure. But when we recognize that we're not that their identity has, we only imagine that's who we were. When we find out that it's not actually who we are, there's a freedom, there's immense freedom. And when that's first encountered, it can feel like I've seen it all. I mean, I've seen the whole picture. I understand. I'm going to go out and tell all my friends, and but the implications of that really take a while to fully seep in. It's not that we haven't seen it, but the implications of seeing that take some time for this body and mind to really recognize it. So it's good if we have that awakening, as liberating, as wonderful, as even pleasurable as that can feel. It's helpful not to talk about it too much, to give it some time, not to, try to explain what happened to all your friends and try to convince them of this is what they should do. And just let it percolate for a while. Okay, so as freeing, as liberating as that is, it's almost like a transcendent up out of this life. Life appeared to be a bit sticky, alternating pleasure and pain, challenges, and then there's this sense of transcending out of that, which is liberating, freeing. But then after a while, and by after a while, I might, could be a couple of years. There can be a sense of, yes, freeing, but a little bit removed from life, like we've transcended up and out of life, and we have the big view, and we can begin noticing that there's a bit of a reluctance to step back into life. It feels safe up here. I can't be harmed up here. I spent a long time trying to extract myself from the messiness of life, and here I've been fortunate enough to recognize that I am free of that. And to tell you the truth, I'm not so sure I want to go back into that. Right? There can be almost a hesitancy there. And yet this sense of dryness, almost a bit stark, everything's fine, but a bit dry. And there can be a sense of, if you're so free, are you free enough to come back into this body, back into this mind, back into this life? But at the same time, we can feel like that really is the next movement, is to see how this awareness, how this consciousness can function in this world. What does that look like? And when we come back into this space, we can find ourselves, in a sense, being newbies. How we acted before, things that motivated us before, no longer seem to have the same pull as before. We might find ourselves just not being that interested in things that were quite interesting before. Things seem to drop away. We might find ourselves less willing to sort of engage in mind-numbing activities just to stay busy, to avoid exactly what we discovered we were. So as we come back into this life, you could say, it can feel like a heart opening, right? A fondness, a sense of generosity, a sense of open-heartedness, welcoming, allowing, being, um, um, just a fondness for the immense creativity, the immense diversity of this life. So we're no longer blocking things out that may pull us down from our transcendent state. We're open to the entirety of life. There's a sense of I don't need to protect myself anymore. Which can feel unusual at first because if we've been sort of open-hearted in the past, maybe we've been taken advantage of, maybe we've been hurt, maybe we've been run over. But this is different. This is open-heartedness from an awareness that what we are is beyond harm. So awareness is available. So awareness isn't afraid of life. So this movement into heart space is opening ourselves back up to this world with all its messiness, right? With all its ups and downs. At this point, we may even see that this world is actually a perfect crucible for awakening. Right? It's easy to say, well, life would be much better if only this, and not that. But it's really the availability of that infinite spectrum of possibilities and feelings and human imaginings and all of that gives us the experiences needed to sort of see through it all. It's like, almost like we've been thrown into a trance and we have the rest of our life to try to figure out how to escape from it. But we're trying to escape from it while we're in the trance, right? So what better way to understand the trance? And when we are able to find our way free of that, we understand the trance, we understand the pull of it. And that is actually the basis for our compassion, our real, true compassion for other people, to see that, yes, there's still a trance operating there, there's still behavior out of conditioning, but I too had challenges with my own conditioning. How much effort and pain I had to go through to see my way clear of that trance that I found myself in. So it's really sort of the the fire that purifies, you could say. So when we've awakened to who we actually are, this awareness, this spaciousness, there is a sense of gratitude towards the illusion. Without the illusion, we wouldn't have been challenged to pull ourselves out of illusion. It's if everything was nice and calm and easy, and would any of us even be sitting here tonight? Right? Life is good. No worries. So it's actually the complexities of life, the challenges of life, that nudge us towards seeing what life is really about. So this is awakening at the level of heart, this open-heartedness, this willingness to experience life. It is in the direction of unity, right? We don't see the world as other. We see it as not other than who we actually are. We don't see the other person as other. We see the same awareness, consciousness that we recognize through awakening at the level of head to be what is animating, what it is actually this body mind. There's a little 3-line part of Kena Upanishads. It's actually one of Eckhart Tolle's favorite quotations, and I'm not very good at remembering things like quotations, but he repeated it so many times I remember it. And the quotation is just 3 short lines. Okay, I'll read the first 2 lines first. The first 2 lines is, the world is illusion, only Brahman is real. Okay, Brahman, this means source, the absolute. World is illusion, Brahman alone is real. Okay, so that's the first 2 lines are a dualistic statement, right? You have the ultimate, the absolute, and you have everything else, the world, right? So it's a nice duality. You have God, consciousness, and you have everything else. Okay, so again, I'll read all 3 lines this time. The world is illusion, Brahman alone is real. The world is Brahman. So that's the movement we are just talking about. It's the world is illusion. You know, we recognize what we truly are is not constrained by the world. It is not constrained by our mind or our bodies. It's free of that. Beautiful. Brahman alone is real. But to get stuck there is not yet the whole story. The third line is the world is Brahman. That's the coming back home. And we realize that the creation is actually not other than the creator. In Zen, it's emptiness in form. Form is emptiness. Not two things. There's only one thing happening here. So that's the movement down to heart, down to sense of unity with existence, not otherness. It's a basis for compassion, true compassion, not compassion that we have to practice and make an effort to, just compassion. And as strange as it may seem, we can realize the awakening of the head, awakening of the heart we're just talking about, and yet we can still feel a clenching, almost a clenching onto our own continued existence, right? I mean, it feels almost cellular, like, you know, as your collection of cells, this being wants to continue to exist. This is natural, right? But we're all aware that one day that will be taken away, right? One day death will come, and it will, the body and the mind won't survive that. So there's an awareness of that, right? You know, it's said that there's really only two things that we're afraid of in life. One is death, of course, and the other is living, right? Afraid of dying, afraid of existing, afraid of non-existence, and afraid of existence. But I'd suggest even that fear of living, that cautiousness, that hesitancy, that anxiety around living and how we live our life and how we move through life is still fear of non-existence. You know, because there's the physical non-existence of the body, of the mind. Right? But then there's sort of this sense, you know, if someone says something negative about us, or, you know, we overhear some gossip about us, or, you know, we fail at something in public, you know, there's this sense of diminishment. I mean, we can just feel it in our gut, you know, feel it in our Hara, like somehow something's been taken away from us, somehow our existence has been threatened. You know, we know mentally that it's, you know, it's not life-threatening, you know, it's not going to cause us to physically die, but it's a movement in that direction. It's a diminishment of who we believe ourselves to be. So it can feel almost death-like, you know, it's like, you know, if, you know, I can't believe that I said that, you know, I'll just never live that down. I'll, you know, it'll haunt me forever. whatever the story is, you know, it feels like this movement towards death in that direction. So we can spend a lot of effort avoiding this matter of facing our own physical extinction, right? And then there's lots of ways we can do it. We can just stay so busy that we don't ever have time to think about it. You know, there's drugs and alcohol, of course, relationships, greed, power, wealth. Lots of ways we can distract ourselves, you know, with ever increasing hopes of pleasure to try to avoid even thinking about it. But, you know, maybe one day we'll get around to really thinking about it, and we'll sort of, you know, try to come to some conceptual okayness about it. You know, like, you know, I've often heard people say, well, you know, I'll live on through my kids. You know, and there's a sense of, you know, it's not just that, you know, my ideas and my direction that I gave my kids in their youth will sort of carry on in a sort of abstract kind of way. It can be even more specific than that. Well, my kids carry my DNA, so somehow if I am the result of my DNA and I pass my DNA on to my kids, then somehow I'll still linger on this earth, right? You know? But to convince ourselves of that, we have to, you know, believe really strongly in the immanence of our DNA, and also believe that it won't be diluted by future generations. Okay. I mean, we've also heard people talking about legacies, right? You know, I'll leave something of such importance to the world that even after I pass, they'll remember me fondly. I mean, a lot of people also hope that there will be some experience, always in the future, by the way, never in the past, but some experience that'll be so profound, so pleasurable, so all-encompassing that it will resolve everything. You know, it might be a spiritual experience, you know, vision, might be you know, gaining some political or corporate power, maybe, you know, I don't know, some achievement, some experience that is so fulfilling that thereafter we just relax. Well, I've had my experience. I can die tomorrow, and I'm good with it. That's the hope, that somehow there'll be an experience in that category, right? The be all and end all. It's sort of like, you know, after World War I, they talked about the war to end all wars. You know, that wasn't true. But that's the hope that we can also carry, that somehow there'll be some future experience that'll resolve everything. Okay, so we can sort of negotiate with death, sort of trying to figure out a way conceptually to make it sort of okay. You know, that when the time comes, I'll be okay with it because, you know, I have this idea about it. There's another, so at this point, there's basically two choices. One is that we can just sort of put it off, you know, come up with a concept that works for us, whatever it is, and, you know, just deal with it when the time comes. And, but in the meantime, there's still this lingering anxiety. You know, maybe it's more than anxiety, maybe it's, you know, a bigger issue than that. You know, especially if we begin to be willing to face that. So that's one choice, just to put it off, and but in the meantime, we're living with that sort of underground fear or anxiety. The other choice is to face it directly, to be willing to look at square and see what is actually there. So there's in Sufism, which is the mystical branch of Islam, there's a well-known expression, and it is die before you die so that you may truly live. There's a very similar expression in Christianity, the Gospel of Thomas, which is just a series of quotes, sayings by Jesus, no storyline, just a series of sayings. And I told you I'm not very good at remembering, but so the saying there in the Gospel of Thomas, only he who loses his life will find it. Only she who loses her life will find it. So we're not talking about physical death here. If we were, the saying wouldn't make any sense at all. You know, die before you die. What does that even mean? So we're talking about something other than physical death. But it has to do with this willingness to fully recognize, almost as a full body recognition that what we are is not the body. You know, we may have, we may say, well, wait a minute, I thought I dealt with that at the level of mind when I realized that what I was consciousness rather than this body mind, rather than ideas, feelings, etc. Yes, that's true, on a level of mind, but this body is, you could say there's a greater density to this body. And so it's not quite so quick to come along with what may be recognized at the level of mind. So here, there's a visceral hanging on, like even though we can recognize that there's freedom in consciousness as what we are, even though we're willing to come back into this body in an open-hearted, vulnerable way to function in this world, there can still be this grasping, like, yes, I understand all that. I understand about preferences, etc., but I still want things to be as I want them to be. Not even on a mental level, but just as a clutching. We can sometimes even feel it in our lower belly, in our Hara, right? There's a clutching, a hanging on as a survival instinct, almost at a cellular level. So when we are willing to step into the territory of being willing to ponder that possibility of cessation of that grasping to life itself, it can feel very real. We may say it's, death at the psychological level. Okay, it may not feel like that. It may feel like, no, this is real. This is the real thing. And you may not even know going through it, how it will turn out. And you might not even know why you were even putting yourself in the vicinity of asking that question. But it's really the awakening at the level of our existential self. You know, the awakening at the level of these bodies, at the level of form, that what we are is not subject to the comings and goings of this form. You know, there's some people that have recognized that. I mean, this is what the Buddhist tradition refers to as no self, right? It's the recognition that what we take to be ourselves is not it's not real. It's not actually who we are. It's not like we were a self and then we give it up. I mean, that's the way people talk about, oh, I'm working on giving up my ego. No, the only thing that's working on giving up your ego is your ego, right? It's the only thing that is interested in playing that game. But when the recognition is, no, we've never been this separate self. That's what we wake up from. The separate self doesn't wake up. No separate self has ever awakened. That's what we wake up from. We wake up from the idea that what I am is a separate self. But when this happens at the level of our very existence, it can feel like the reality of death itself. And that movement through that willingness to take that step through that to see what lies on the other side is irrational. It's not something that you do. It's not something that you can do. It's a movement. It's not even a courageous movement, right? It's a movement that's taken because you have to, and you don't even know why you have to. It's almost as if, well, I just have to know, regardless of the consequences. I have to know. Now, it's possible that movement into no self can happen in a flash. I mean, there are books about people that's happened to. Suzanne Siegel, Collision with the Infinite, talks about, at the moment before stepping on the bus, she was herself, and then she stepped on the bus, and what got on the bus no longer had a self. Efficient, right? Confusing, really confusing. It happened to her without a spiritual background. It happened. It was a recognition in a moment. That wasn't my experience. My experience was that it was much more like an erosional process, something that didn't happen overnight. It was just a wearing away of my ability or tendency to see my identity as being housed in this body. And it didn't change overnight. It took some time. It took several years. It's after a while you begin to lose interest of whether where you even are in that process, because it's not relevant. It's just it's the body's coming to a deeper and deeper recognition of what's true. Doesn't make quite as good a story, but I think it's more likely to be more common. So what we've been talking about is waking up at the level of Hara. So this movement, it doesn't have to be in the sequential order. It is also probably more common in that direction, but it doesn't have to be. However it happens will be unique to you, and it's not actually all that beneficial to compare how it's unfolding for you to how it's unfolding for someone else. It may, in the most general sense, be helpful to understand that the awakening isn't a one-time thing. It is it's initiated by the end of seeking, the recognition of what we are, but how that unfolds, how that understanding manifests itself in and through this body mind is an ongoing thing. There's as form, as these bodies, as these conditioned beings, there's no apparent end to that unfolding. Awareness is there, but this unfolding within the body, the implications of how that awareness moves in the world is something that we continue to understand more and more as time goes on. Okay, so what we've been talking about is just this movement from head to heart to Hara. Awakening at the level of mind, awakening to unity, awakening from our existential grasp of identification with this body. The benefit of this dying before you die is that thereafter fear is absent. You've been willing to walk through that door. The absence of fear for the remainder of our life is immensely freeing. Immensely freeing. We're left to enjoy, participate in, welcome, be appreciative of this life without fear. So that's very, very, don't take any of what I've said too concretely. But that general direction into going ever further in letting go, and letting go even more, is the direction of this journey. So I wish you all well.